Evening traffic rolled through the city with the rhythm of routine, cars humming, streetlights flickering to life, a faint drizzle misting the windshield of a black luxury sedan gliding down Lincoln Avenue. Inside, the driver, Dr. Elena Brooks, sat upright and calm, her eyes fixed on the flow of lights ahead. The week had been long. Meetings, travel, endless calls, and this was her one quiet stretch before returning to the bureau office downtown. Behind her, a patrol cruiser slowed. Its headlights caught the reflection of the sedan's sleek rear plate. The officer inside, new to the beat and eager to prove himself, tapped the onboard terminal. A brief mismatch appeared on the registration record, an old system error more common than serious, but it was enough to trigger curiosity. The cruiser eased closer, lights flashing once, and Elena sighed, signaling toward the curb. She pulled over smoothly. Rain ticked against the roof. Her training kicked in, decades of professionalism layered under patience. She lowered the window halfway, kept both hands on the steering wheel, and waited. The officer approached, cautious but uncertain. He was young, maybe mid-20s, still finding the balance between authority and restraint. He introduced himself, explaining a minor discrepancy in the vehicle record. Elena listened, nodded, and reached slowly toward the glove compartment. She moved with deliberate care, narrating every gesture, her voice calm. Years of law enforcement experience had taught her that clarity defused tension. Her credentials rested atop the registration papers, a simple leather wallet with a gold-trimmed badge inside, the letters FBI embossed across the seal. When she handed it over, the officer blinked, not quite processing what he was holding. The drizzle thickened, streaking the window. He took a slow step back, looked again, and then met her eyes through the glass. There was a pause, just long enough for both of them to understand the shift in the moment. Elena remained quiet. She'd seen that expression before, the startled recognition when someone realized their assumption had led them astray. She didn't need to say anything. The silence carried its own weight. The officer inhaled, exhaled, then leaned slightly toward the car. "Ma'am, Director Brooks." She gave a single nod. Another cruiser pulled up behind them. The senior sergeant stepped out, raincoat flapping in the wind, and quickly took stock of the scene. Within seconds, tone and posture changed, formality replacing authority, respect edging out suspicion. The sergeant motioned discreetly, and the younger officer returned the badge with both hands. Elena accepted it, not with triumph, but with composure. "I understand you have a job to do," she said evenly, "but you might want to have that registration system checked. It's been throwing mismatched data all week." The sergeant apologized, professional and direct. The younger officer, visibly humbled, nodded repeatedly, the color draining from his face. Elena started the engine again, merging back into traffic with steady grace. As the cars receded into the rain, the sergeant turned to his rookie. "That's the Bureau's regional director. You'll be writing a full report." Back inside the sedan, the quiet returned, but it wasn't the same. Elena's mind replayed the encounter, not with anger, but with reflection. How quickly perceptions formed, how easily data errors or bias could escalate into unnecessary tension. Even without confrontation, the imbalance of assumption hung heavy in the air. She pressed the hands-free button on the dashboard. "Notify internal review," she said. "We need to look into local federal coordination on vehicle queries again." At headquarters later that night, lights burned long past midnight. The incident circulated through internal channels, filed under field communication discrepancy. Officially, it was a simple system glitch, but the unspoken lesson resonated more deeply. The following morning, the young officer received a call from his chief requesting an immediate debrief. He sat at his desk, replaying every moment, the flashing lights, the look on her face, the realization. It wasn't just about rank or title. It was about the person behind the wheel he hadn't truly seen. When the chief arrived, he didn't start with reprimand. Instead, he asked, "What did you learn?" The rookie hesitated. "That verification doesn't always mean understanding, sir." The chief nodded slowly. "Then write that down." He did. Word of the event spread quietly across departments, eventually reaching training programs and seminars. It became a case study, stripped of names, but heavy with meaning. Elena, meanwhile, continued her work as though nothing had happened, But within her office, she made a point of reminding teams that leadership wasn't only about command. It was about consistency. She stood before a new class of field agents and recounted a story, not in detail, but in essence, about composure, assumption, and awareness. She didn't mention the traffic stop. She didn't need to. The lesson was universal. Later, during an interagency meeting, the same sergeant who had intervened approached her quietly. "Director Brooks," he said, "about that night. Thank you for your patience. My officer learned more in 5 minutes than most do in 5 months." Elena gave a small smile. "We all keep learning," she said. That line became the informal motto for their next collaborative training. We all keep learning. It appeared on briefing slides, in internal memos, and eventually, in recruitment materials emphasizing empathy and precision in field engagement. Months passed. The incident faded from public knowledge, but within professional circles, it marked a turning point. The Bureau and local departments established a joint communication audit program to cross-check data before patrol deployment. It reduced similar mismatches by nearly 40% within a year. The young officer eventually earned commendation for his later work, though he never forgot that night. He carried a printed note inside his patrol logbook, 5 words written in his own handwriting. Pause before presuming anything. One evening, nearly a year later, fate offered a quiet symmetry. The same stretch of Lincoln Avenue shimmered under a calm sunset. A different car slowed to the curb, hazard lights blinking. The officer, now seasoned and composed, approached with steady confidence. "Evening, sir. Routine check. Take your time." No tension, no assumption, just clarity. The driver smiled, handed over documents, and the moment passed without friction. The process was ordinary, but the change behind it was extraordinary. At headquarters, Director Brooks reviewed weekly reports. Metrics had improved, complaints dropped, and coordination logs showed smoother exchanges between federal and municipal systems. She noted the statistics, but what mattered most wasn't the data. It was the culture shift beneath it. In her private reflection notes, she wrote, "Progress is built not on perfection." Elena Brooks sat in her office overlooking the city skyline. The night glimmered below, each light a story unfolding quietly, unseen. She leaned back in her chair, letting the hum of the city fill the space between thoughts. For years, her life had been a pattern of high-pressure operations and careful decisions. But this recent encounter had carved a different kind of awareness into her routine. She had always believed that leadership was tested most not during crisis, but in the silent moments afterward, when reflection replaced adrenaline. That stop on Lincoln Avenue wasn't about a mistake in protocol or database error. It was a mirror held up to a larger truth. Even systems built on precision could falter when human assumptions took the lead. The next morning, she arrived early for a meeting with the Bureau's field operations team. The discussion centered on a new directive, the creation of a real-time cross-verification hub connecting federal and local law enforcement databases. It wasn't flashy policy, it was structural integrity in action. For Elena, this was how progress began, not in speeches, but in architecture. Meanwhile, the young officer from that night, Officer Hayes, found himself volunteering for additional training shifts. He requested ride-alongs with senior officers known for their calm and restraint. He didn't say why, didn't need to, but his mentors noticed. Every call, every stop, every exchange carried more patience than before. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he sat with his partner on a quiet patrol stretch. "You ever think about how one mistake can change how you see everything?" he asked. His partner shrugged. "If you learn from it, it's not a mistake anymore." Hayes smiled faintly, eyes on the fading light. "Guess that's true." Back at the Bureau, the integration system began to take shape. Elena's team worked with state IT specialists, bridging decades-old code with modern security frameworks. It was tedious work, often uncelebrated, but necessary. One evening, an analyst named Priya found a recurring glitch in the data sync process, the same kind that had triggered the false registration flag that night. When she fixed it, she paused, realizing the small but significant thread connecting her keystroke to that past event. She sent a report to Elena. Patch successful. Latency reduced by 70%. Elena responded simply, "Good work. These details matter." Outside, the city breathed under soft rain again. History, Elena thought, had a way of circling back, not to punish, but to teach. Several months later, a conference convened at the state capitol to discuss interagency coordination. Elena was invited to speak. Her topic wasn't about authority or enforcement. It was about empathy and structure in decision-making. She spoke without notes, her tone steady, every word measured. In the field, precision saves lives, she said. But empathy sustains integrity. Systems are built by people, and people bring their own histories, their own perspectives. If we don't account for that, we leave gaps where misunderstanding can grow. The hall was silent when she finished. Not because her words were loud, but because they resonated quietly. Later, a police chief from a neighboring county approached her. "You said something that hit home," he admitted. "We measure efficiency in minutes, but maybe we should measure it in understanding." Elena nodded. Understanding gives meaning to every minute. That conversation sparked another collaboration, an initiative called Project Reflection, where officers participated in scenario-based workshops designed to simulate uncertainty without conflict. The program encouraged listening, observation, and accountability. Within a year, participating precincts reported a sharp decline in unnecessary escalations. Hayes attended one of the early sessions. When asked why he joined, he said, "Because once, someone gave me patience when they didn't have to." The trainer paused, then replied, "That's exactly how change begins." The story spread quietly, never reaching the news cycle, but moving through halls of training academies and agency meetings. It became the kind of story retold not for drama, but for its quiet lesson in restraint. For Elena, life went on, missions, briefings, interdepartmental meetings, but she carried a new ritual. After each major operation, she met privately with her team and asked a single question: what did we overlook? It wasn't criticism, it was calibration. A small practice that gradually reshaped how her teams thought about diligence and humility. One evening, after a long day, Elena returned home and sat with her husband on the porch. The air was cool, the street peaceful. He handed her a cup of tea and said, "I'm just thinking more about that night, about what it meant," she replied. "One moment can shift a culture if we let it." He nodded. "You turned it into something better." "Not me alone," she said softly. "Everyone who learned from it." They sat in silence, watching the streetlights blink on one by one. Elsewhere, in another city, an academy instructor concluded a lesson on procedural reform. He closed his binder and said, "Remember, verification is more than data, it's respect. We don't enforce authority, we maintain trust." Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "There was a case once someone stopped the wrong car. It ended well, but it changed everything." In the back row, a recruit scribbled those words down, not realizing that the woman he'd learn about later in his career was the same Director Brooks whose quiet reform had reshaped their entire approach. The impact of that night outlived memory. It lived in behavior, in pauses, in decisions made with thought instead of reaction. Years passed. Technology evolved. Procedures updated. Yet in every policy meeting, in every interagency call, Elena's phrase echoed: progress is built not on perfection, but on pause. When she eventually retired, the Bureau hosted a quiet ceremony, attended by colleagues, chiefs, and even a few of the young officers who had once been trainees in Project Reflection. Among them stood Hayes, now a lieutenant. After the speeches, he approached her, holding an old patrol logbook. Inside, those same 5 words he'd written years ago. He handed her the page. "You gave me this lesson," he said. She looked at the handwriting, smiled gently. "No," she corrected. "You gave it meaning." They shook hands, and the applause faded into soft conversation. Later that evening, standing outside beneath the stars, Elena reflected on the years behind her. Change was never loud. It was quiet, persistent, and human. One stop, one mistake, one correction at a time. The city lights shimmered again, and for a moment, the night felt familiar. Like that first rain-soaked evening when everything had begun. The Bureau's leadership changed hands, but her imprint remained carved deep within its structure. The new director, Marcus Ellison, often referenced her quiet influence when discussing reform. He'd been a field agent during her tenure and had witnessed firsthand the subtle transformation she guided, a shift from defensive bureaucracy to transparent accountability. The reform she started, Project Reflection, had matured into something larger, an interagency framework known as the Federal Local Integrity Alliance. It was more than policy, it was a philosophy. Departments that joined the initiative committed to independent review boards composed not only of officers, but also of civilians, psychologists, and data analysts. It was the first time in decades that the concept of community within command became a tangible standard rather than an abstract slogan. The public's initial reaction was mixed. Some questioned whether cooperation across so many jurisdictions could ever truly function. Others praised it as the most practical bridge between citizens and enforcement agencies in modern history. Within a year, the results spoke louder than any press release. Complaints involving miscommunication between agencies dropped by nearly 60%. Disciplinary actions related to procedural violations fell dramatically. But the most telling change was in attitude. Officers began logging interactions with more care, taking a few seconds longer before making decisions. Seconds that often made the difference between escalation and resolution. Ellison's speeches reflected this new tone. He rarely used the word power. Instead, he spoke about presence. He told recruits, "Power ends where awareness begins. If you know what you're doing, you don't need to prove it." Behind the scenes, several think tanks began studying the impact of Brooks' reforms. One report from the National Institute of Civic Trust concluded that her methods had reduced not only incidents of bias, but also officer stress levels. It noted that her approach transformed procedural awareness into emotional intelligence, a measurable, teachable asset in modern policing. When journalists asked her to comment, Elena politely declined interviews. She had no desire to become a symbol. Her belief was simple. Leadership was most effective when it didn't seek attention. Yet, her name often appeared in policy roundtables, congressional hearings, and even law school lectures discussing ethical frameworks for law enforcement leadership. In one of those hearings, Senator Naomi Ruiz, a former prosecutor and strong advocate for institutional accountability, quoted Brooks directly. She once said progress isn't a headline, it's a habit. That's the kind of leadership this nation needs to remember. The statement circulated widely, finding its way into news segments, documentaries, and university discussions. Meanwhile, Ellison continued to evolve her vision. He launched the Brooks Initiative for Ethical Training, a digital program allowing officers nationwide to engage in scenario-based simulations that tested their judgment under pressure. Each module was built not to reward aggression or dominance, but to measure emotional control, observation, and communication. The program's early feedback stunned policymakers. Completion rates were higher than any federal training project in years. Participants described it not as mandatory coursework, but as a reminder of why they joined the service in the first place. In one recorded testimonial, a veteran detective said, "It's strange, we were trained to respond fast. This training teaches us to respond right. That's harder, but it feels better." Ellison shared that quote during an annual Bureau review. That, he told the audience, is the future we're shaping. In the public sphere, trust began to rebuild, slowly, cautiously, but genuinely. News outlets covering community police relations started referencing the alliance's outcomes as examples of meaningful reform. Even critics acknowledged that while no system was perfect, the willingness to evolve openly was progress in itself. Elena, though no longer in uniform, occasionally advised committees reviewing national ethics standards. She spoke infrequently but with precision, her words carrying the same composure that once steadied tense rooms. During one such meeting, a senior official asked her, "Director Brooks, do you think reform can ever be complete?" She considered the question for a long moment before replying. Completion implies we've finished learning. We never stop learning. Not as people, not as institutions. That quote would later be inscribed on the dedication wall of the new Federal Training and Ethics Center, unveiled 2 years later in Washington, D.C. The center's mission was simple: to teach decision-making through reflection. Ellison took the podium. "We're standing in the house that Director Brooks built," he said. "Every file here, every lesson taught, carries her fingerprint." She turned a moment of misunderstanding into a legacy of comprehension. The audience rose in quiet applause. Among them were journalists, officers, civic leaders, and even a few civilians who had once been part of police review boards. Their presence represented the transformation Brooks had envisioned. a full circle of trust and accountability. Outside, on the steps of the center, a mural caught the light. It depicted an open road under gentle rain, headlights fading into the horizon. Beneath it were the words she'd once written in her private journal. Progress is built not on perfection, but on pause. In that moment, her philosophy had transcended departments and uniforms. It had become a shared consciousness, a guiding standard for those who served and those who were served. Years later, long after she had faded from public view, new recruits at the academy would watch a short training film titled The Pause Protocol. It dramatized a simple idea. Every decision begins with awareness. The narrator ended with a line that encapsulated her entire legacy. Integrity is not a reaction, it's a rhythm. And when we learn to listen to that rhythm, we move together, officers, citizens, and leaders, toward a safer, more human world. The echoes of stories like this one remind us that growth often begins in silence, in the pause between reaction and understanding. What happened on a quiet city street one rainy night became more than an encounter. It became a reminder that awareness can rebuild trust and patience can rewrite outcomes. When we look deeper, every small act of restraint, every moment of reflection, becomes part of something larger, a culture of respect, learning, and accountability. And those lessons, no matter how quietly they begin, ripple outward in ways that shape generations of service and leadership. If this story moved you, taught you something new, or simply made you think, take a moment to support this work. Like this video, share it with others who believe in positive change, and subscribe for more stories that explore justice, humanity, and redemption in the real world. Your engagement helps these lessons reach further, because the more we listen, the more we learn, and the closer we come to understanding one another. Stay informed, stay aware, and as always, thank you for watching.